So thanks for everyone for joining us today. And this is our update webinar on CNL's Douglas Point decommissioning project. And first, and this is especially important given that June is National Indigenous History Month, I would like to acknowledge that the Douglas Point facility is located on the traditional territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of Nawash and Saugeen First Nation. CNL is committed to working with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as well as the Métis Nation of Ontario, the historic Saugeen Métis, and we recognize and appreciate their connection, the Indigenous connection to this land. We acknowledge, respect, and seek to better recognize Indigenous history, rights, and title on the lands where we work. So with today's webinar, we'll be sharing about a 20-minute presentation, and then we'll open the floor for a question and answer period. And first off, I'll introduce the team today, and I'll give a bit of an overview of Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, or CNL. But before we get into that, I'll do a few logistic notes. First off, there is simultaneous interpretation of this discussion. So you can access the webinar today in French or English. So use the globe icon on the bottom right of the Zoom bar. So then you toggle on, you select the language you would like to hear. And if you are attending in French today, there might be a bit of a lag in the translation. Today's session, like I said, is planned for about 20-minute presentation and then about 25 minutes for questions. And please submit your questions throughout the presentation at any point, and then we'll respond at the end to all those questions. And if we don't get to any of them during the webinar, then we will follow up in writing if we don't have enough time. And the Q&A icon is also along with the globe icon at the bottom of the screen on Zoom. So do note, you can ask your questions anonymously or use your name, but we are recording these sessions and posting them to our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you're having any technical issues or if you have any questions outside of the webinar, like in a few weeks or whenever, please reach out at any time to our email, and that's crmstakeholder@cnl.ca on the screen there. And following the presentation, we're going to be doing a quick poll question. And then after this webinar, we'll also be following up with a survey today. It's short, it's about 10 questions, and we'd really appreciate if you take the time to share your thoughts on our webinars, and that feedback can help us do better next time and know what topics you want to hear from us on. Okay, with that, I'm going to get started with our presentation. So like I said, it's a community update webinar, so we're going to focus on our recent accomplishments at the facility and our plans for the next year. And we also want to highlight where to find us if you want more details or frequent updates. A really important part of the decommissioning process is seeking public perspectives on the decommissioning and Indigenous perspectives so we can incorporate feedback into our plans as we go forward. Okay, so next slide, our team today. We've got our director, who's also the acting deputy general manager, and that's George Al-Haddad, and he's responsible for Douglas Point, as well as our Gentil 1 or G1 reactor decommissioning program and the reactor segmentation program, which covers all of CNL's reactors. We also have Joe Holstead, and he is the decommissioning manager for Douglas Point, responsible for managing the projects within the decommissioning project, as well as the schedule and budget, and he's the lead for the team overseeing the work execution. We also have Julie Therrien. Julie Therrien is the facility authority for Douglas Point, and she interfaces with the regulator, so that's the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and authorizes the work conducted at the facility. Ultimately, Julie's responsibility is to ensure the safety of the worker, people, and the environment while we're performing these decommissioning activities. And then me, I'm Margot Thompson. I'm a senior communications officer with CNL, and I support public engagement and Indigenous engagement for our Douglas Point project. I also grew up pretty locally, so I love the fact that I get to work on Douglas Point project, and I think it's a really neat part of our history. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? To start, I'm going to share a bit about who we are at CNL and why we're decommissioning Douglas Point. Then I'll turn it over to George to give an overview on the decommissioning plans and what we've been up to since our last public webinar, which was last June, as well as what we're planning for the next year. Then we'll move on to the Q&As. Okay, so who is CNL? Next slide, please. So CNL, we're Canada's National Nuclear Laboratories. Our main site is the Chalk River Laboratories in the Ottawa Valley. And we have a focus on scientific research and development in support of the nuclear industry, as well as other industries too, so healthcare and other national priorities. CNL's corporate structure is a GOCO, so that's government-owned, contractor-operated. Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, or ACL, is the federal crown corporation that owns CNL. And CNL operates and manages the ACL owned sites, including Douglas Point, on behalf of ACL. So ACL owns a site, but CNL is actually the license holder and manages the day-to-day operations. Okay, next slide, please. We'll just quickly, next slide. Forgot to say that. We're actually on the next slide, Rachel. Thanks. So other sites managed by CNL include Whiteshell Laboratories in Manitoba and Douglas Point, which was the first nuclear power plant in Canada. And Douglas Point helped us get where we are today with Ontario's nuclear-led energy grid. Next slide, please. So CNL has three main priorities. Our work to decommission Douglas Point facility falls under the Restore and Protect the Environment mission aspect of our three missions. And we want to take care of this facility through responsible decommissioning and environmental remediation. We're also aimed at supporting the nuclear industry and supplying non-carbon energy. And we are continuing the isotope legacy of Chalk River with our actinium-225 isotope program. And actinium-225 is a radioisotope that supports cancer therapies. Next slide, please. So why are we decommissioning Douglas Point now? So really, it's about taking care of the past right now and cleaning up to support an environmentally sound future. So in doing so, we're supporting the full closure of the life cycle of a nuclear power plant. As I mentioned before, Douglas Point facility was the first nuclear power plant in Canada. It sits within the wider Bruce Nuclear Generating Station site. And the facility consists of a reactor and its support facilities. And George will go into a bit of what the facility layout is and how we're decommissioning that reactor and support facilities in 1 minute. It was constructed in the 1960s and it ran from 67 to 84. And then in the late 80s, it was put into safe shutdown. The fuel was removed and put into above ground dry storage on site, and that's where it still is today. And after that, that was the initial phase 1 decommissioning phase. And after that, the facility was in safe shutdown state for 30 years. We call that the storage with surveillance phase. And then in 2020, we went through a public licensing process. And in 2021, the Federal Nuclear Regulator, the CNSC, or Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, granted CNL a 10-year license to start the final stage of decommissioning. So why are we moving forward with that final stage? So one, it's a responsibility. ACL, our federal crown corporation owner, has the government mandate to clean up historic radioactive waste sites, which would include safely decommissioning prototype reactors like Douglas Point. It's also a modern way, so there's growing international recognition that there are significant benefits to decommissioning legacy facilities later, or sooner rather than later, not later. And ultimately, it's about looking after future generations. We want to take care of this liability now. We don't want to leave it to our children or grandchildren to clean up. So with that, we're going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to hand it over to George, who's going to be sharing the plans for decommissioning and overview, as well as what we've been up to recently and what we're planning for the next year.
Thank you, Margot. So the next slide. So what we did was the Douglas Point facility, we took an approach of 5, we split the facility in 5 envelopes, as you see. Envelope A, which then on the screen indicated with a black arrow right now and a green A around it, is a non-nuclear building, and which under DDP Volume 2 was the CNSC approved, and that is most of the work right now we are doing on site. The next envelope is envelope B, is a service building, verification building, welding shop, and the steamer bridge, which is also a approved DDP. And we looking at the work as we speak right now, and some of it early this year. And the envelope C is the reactor building clear out, is whatever inside the building except the calandria and the building itself. And envelope D is the fuel canister, which is on the top right corner. And envelope E is the final, is in its reactor building itself. After we remove everything, we'll decommission the reactor building itself. Next slide. So where the waste is going. So most of the waste from the first two DDPs, or 96% of that waste is recyclable or reused waste. So we're trying to be as much as possible sustainable and socially responsible by recycling waste and reusing it wherever we can. 3% of that of the remaining waste goes to landfill, is regular and normal waste generated from the facility, and less than 1% it's between hazardous and radioactive waste. Any radioactive waste come to Chalk River. Any hazardous material like asbestos goes to special landfill, which has the capability to handle that waste and license to handle that waste and that material. So that's where the waste is going in the first two DDPs. And next slide, we're gonna go and talk about what we have been doing and what our achievement. So in the last few years, are a lot of things happening at the site. So I'm gonna start from the top left corner. Is a steamer bridge. It's a bridge between the reactor building and the turbine building, which have the steam system, electrical system, and other services coming between the reactor building and the turbine building. Because we're planning on the demolition of the turbine building, that is the first phase, we have to demolish that bridge. That bridge went down last year around December. If you go from the left to the right, you see the progress, and now we can see Lake Huron from the picture on the right side. On the bottom corner, we are talking about the perimeter trenching. What we did there is to make sure the safety of the employee and to make sure whatever we are doing in the facility are controlled and there are no services coming in and out of the building. We did the trenching around the facility to make sure the facility is a black and a dark and cold state, and nothing coming in and nothing coming out from a power or water or air or anything, any services, to make sure the safety of the people. Reactor building characterization is a picture on the bottom second. The reason we do characterization to ensure all the work and all the application we're doing are known, and we know what waste we're dealing with and what material we're dealing with. This activity always happen on our site for anything we do day in, day out. And the last piece is a service building characterization, is we characterizing the service building so we can plan the work safely and decommission it according to the plan. So those are the work we did in the last couple of years, and we're going to talk about the future and what we're trying to do and establish in the next few years. So major work happening this year, which is going to make a big impact on the landscape of the building of the site, is the dismantling of the non-nuclear building. If you remember, we talked about the envelope A. Majority of the building from envelope A will be dismantled by the end of this year and on the ground. That's including the turbine building and the administration building and auxiliary building. The second work is to enable ourselves to do work in the reactor building. We need to refurbish the previous crane and start removing the hazardous material from the service building and continue characterization as previously stated. Legacy waste removal, we have some legacy waste removal in the resin tanks. Those will be out by the end of this year as well. completing the parameter building around the reactor building, which enable us to start removing the equipment from the reactor building when DDP number 4 is approved. The sump pump maintenance is to ensure we're controlling and maintaining the facility as required by the license and to keep it in a good state. And last but not least, the last two things is to maintain the crane and to do the reactor building roof repair to ensure the facility in a good state until we decommission it completely. Next slide. I'm going to hand it back to you, Margot, to finish us up. Thank you.
Thanks, George. So again, I'll reiterate what I said earlier. We're really looking to hear from the public. This is one of the reasons why we're sharing this webinar today. We want to know what you think of the project, or if you have any questions, please reach out. Next slide, please. So you can find us at www.cnl.ca/dp. There's a feedback form there. There's a little bit more about the project, including that timeline image. And you can also reach out at any time to our team via email, urmstakeholder@cnl.ca. We really want to hear from you. Like I said, we're open and we're looking for feedback, and love to answer questions too. So thanks again, everybody, for attending. And with that, I'm going to do our poll before we hop over to our Q&A. Our poll today is a bit related to what I just said. I think since 2020, we've been doing about roughly an annual webinar on the Douglas Point project. And we are looking to see if that's frequent enough, or you want something a little bit less frequent or more frequent. Basically, how often do you want to hear from CNL on the Douglas Point project? So good group on the line today. I can see the responses coming in quickly. Everybody's eager to share. This is great. Love to see it. And again, I'll make a plug for the survey we're sending out after the webinar. It's about 10 questions. It shouldn't take you longer than 2 minutes. So I know it's a pain getting surveys in your email, but we really would appreciate if you can fill that out. Okay, so I think I'll wait till we've got most people have participated. I think we're about 76. Okay, I'm going to share the results. Okay, so most folks are saying they'd like to hear, about 50% would like to hear from us twice a year about a Douglas Point update. So that's good to know. We can incorporate that into our communications planning and look to maybe do an update in about 6 months from now. That's great. Okay, thanks everybody for that. And with that, we're gonna stop sharing our screen, and we have Joe and Julie on to support with questions. And George, if we all want to flip our screens on. And Rachel, if you want to stop sharing. And I'll go over to the Q&A. Okay, so our first question we had, and please feel free to send your questions in. We've got one question, and it's about the corporate structure of CNL. So I'm going to answer this. The person says, I thought I heard Ms. Thompson state that CNL is owned by ACL. Yes, that's correct. So CNL is owned by Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. But this person had understood that CNL was owned by CNEA, Canadian National Energy Alliance. No, CNEA does not own CNL. It's ACL is the owner, the Federal Crown Corporation. So it is it's a particular kind of corporate structure, as I had mentioned, the GoCo model. So I'm going to leave a link to the ACL webpage, which has some more information on how the CNEA fits into this. Okay. Okay, so we have another question, and I think this is a Julie question. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Julie. It's how long will the spent fuel canisters last?
How long will the spent fuel canisters last? There is a defined design life for the spent fuel canister, which is another 15 years. CNL has developed plans to either evaluate the structure as we get closer to the end of the design life to possibly extend the lifespan of the spent fuel canister. And we also have other plans to move the fuel to either a disposal site, the Canadian Deep Geological Repository that is planned for the future. It's not defined yet when that's going to be operational and or where the site location is going to be. But that's the ultimate final state as to where the fuel is going to go. And also CNL is evaluating the possibility of moving that fuel, consolidating all the ACL fuel in one location at the Chalk River site. So that's kind of the story about the spent fuel. We're keeping informed with the development of the DGR to better plan the final or the path forward for the Douglas Point spent fuel.
Okay, thanks, Julie. And I think the next question I see, it's from Stan, and I believe this is a Joe question. So was the upgrader removed from the service building?
Yeah, so the heavy water upgrader is still in the service building. We have it's part of planning envelope B that George covered in the presentation. It'll be removed probably in the next 2 years. It has been abated though in that area.
Thanks, Joe. And thanks, Stan, for the question. Okay, so we've got a question from Doug Gould. Long-term plans for the DP site after decommissioning. So I think I'll start with this one, and then I'll hand it over to Julie to share a little bit more. So the long-term plans for the site, if you might not have seen on that timeline, but the final date we have for finishing the decommissioning is 2070. We do anticipate that most of the structures and facilities, well, no, it'll all be gone by well before 2070. But we do have that long lead time to account for environmental remediation and any contingencies that are outside of control, right? So right now, ACL ultimately would own the site, so it would be returned to ACL, but CNL is looking for Indigenous and public perspectives on that long term, and it's what we call land use end state. So Julie, I'll hand it over to you to add.
Thanks, Margot. Actually, very well answered question, Margot. The only thing I would add is it is planned that the final end state will be for industrial reuse. So that's as defined in the standards. So that's the plan for Douglas Point, and we are highly seeking inputs from the communities surrounding the area and the Indigenous nations to see what this end state will look like, and we can work together on defining that.
That's right, and I'll do another plug. You know where to find us, cnl.ca/DP. Okay, so we have a question from Bill McKee. Where are we on the plan timeline? So
Take that one.
Joe's got his hand up.
Okay. Joe, you want to take
Sure.
that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So we are, just to speak, I think the clearest way to speak to that is the planning envelopes. We are right in the middle of planning envelope A, which is the demolition of the non-liquid buildings. But we are at the same time preparing for the other envelopes as well through characterization and hazard removal. to make sure that we're ready to keep moving on.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Joe. Okay, so here's another Joe question, I think. Is the project on schedule/budget?
Yeah, more or less. Like it's tracking with our 10-year plan.
All right, thanks, Joe. Okay, and we have another question from another.
Yes, yes. We still. I made to clarify. We still have a active ventilation system, and I should say it is not under vacuum all the time. It is. We only turn on the ventilation like 48 hours before there's an entry, so it doesn't constantly run, but it does run before we do work in there or we have a personnel entry.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, and the question there was, Sam was asking, is the reactor building still under vacuum? So thanks, Joe. Okay, so I think another, Joe, you're popular today. This is you. Does CNL have a protocol that encourages local hiring of qualified tradespeople to work on the decommissioning project phases? So maybe you can speak a bit to who's working at the site now and how we hire local trades folks.
So we don't hire trades ourselves. We do our work, our field work through our contracting partners, but we do have, we do put weight and that when we make a decision on who to hire for a specific element of a project. But we work through contracting partners to get local tradespeople.
Yeah, and I think we can say those contractors have local offices too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so I think this might be a combo, Joe, Julie. How do current dose rates at Douglas Point compare to dose rates when the unit was shut down? Not in terms of public dose, but in terms of dose to individuals doing the decommissioning. So maybe Joe, you can, oh, Julie went off mute. You're both off mute. Who wants to go first?
I can go. So it has been, so the dose have reduced quite significantly to a point where it is now deemed safe to do, to execute the decommissioning. A certain aspect of the site, if we talk about the calandria, will still have high dose. We're performing currently characterization of the calandria to better define the tools and so on to be able to perform the segmentation of the calandria in a safe manner. So the dose has dropped on an exponential manner, a logarithmic manner, and when we presented our plans to the Commission to support the amendment to execute decommissioning, we have proven to the Commission that it was safe to do so now, and there is actually no significant benefit in waiting on a longer period as the dose is not going to significantly decrease over the next 10-15 years. We're pretty stable now. I hope that answers the question. Joe, is there anything you wanted to add to this?
No, you got it, Julie.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. And I get the sense from some of these questions that there might be some people who actually worked at the facility. Okay, so we have another question from Stan. Have the radiation fields decreased in the moderator room? I think this is sort of related to the last question we had too about the overall dose rate.
Yeah, so it did, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we have another question from Bill. I understand the later stages of decommissioning depend on the DGR status. Is that correct? I would say yes and no. So I'm assuming that, Bill, you're referring to the nuclear waste management operation or organization project, the DGR for all of Canada's high level fuel. And CNL's current plan for this, with all the fuel in the spent fuel canister area. So if the DGR were to be in South Bruce, so right now there's the 2 sites left in the site selection process through the NWMO, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. CNL plans to keep the spent fuel canister area where it is, keep the fuel at Douglas Point. And if the DGR site selection process went to Ignis, which is up in Northern Ontario, CNL plan to consolidate the fuel at Douglas Point at Chalk River Laboratories for interim storage. So Julie, did I cover everything there, or is there anything else to add with that one?
No, I think you answered pretty good. The other aspect of this will be the Nuclear Waste Organization is also looking into intermediate level waste disposal sites, and that is something that's being looked into right now. The intermediate level waste that would be generated by the decommissioning of Douglas Point is planned to go in Chalk River for storage until such facility is available.
Oh, perfect. Yes. Yeah. So I think the bottom line is that regardless of these other processes that are ongoing, the waste from the decommissioning will be in safe storage. Okay. Oh, this question ties in nicely to the last question. So we've got, what radioactive waste is planned to be sent to Chalk River, and when does CNL intend this to happen? So George covered this in the presentation a little bit, but Joe, did you want to
Sure.
share a bit more about?
Yeah, I can add to that. So yeah, there was a slide there that mentioned that most waste is recycled. For radioactive waste, that often means metal melt, which means that material does not get sent back to Chalk River. But outside of that instance, that activity, activity in waste ends up at Chalk River. So far that's been dry active waste we've cleaned up from the site. The small portion that can't be recycled ends up at Chalk River. PPE, all that stuff, it ends up back at Chalk River. So it's already happening. That's what it's basically what I'm saying.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
And if people are interested in knowing how much waste is being produced on an annual basis from the Douglas Point decommissioning, those wastes are all captured and where they're being sent per location in our annual compliance monitoring report. You can make a request to see this, but this is publicly available.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, that's a good point. We do have a lot of data on where the waste is sent and the volumes of the waste that is sent where. So if you want to find out more about that kind of detail, again, reach out and we'll share. Okay, so this is a good question. What is the current plan for removing the large components from the reactor building through the containment walls or through the airlock? Or maybe there's a third option. I think this is a Joe question.
Okay, yeah, no, it's a pretty astute question. So the plan is to go, as you say there, through the airlock is the current plan. We did an optioneering study where we looked at all the different components and how to size reduce them and how we're going to ship them, and basically came to the conclusion that we'll do it all through the airlock, the basically 9x9 opening.
Yeah, we do. We've got a really well-informed audience on the line today. Thank you. Okay, so what mitigations are in place to protect the environment during decommissioning? I'm going to give this one to Julie. It's a pretty broad question, but we've got some specific things that we're doing to protect the environment during decommissioning.
That's correct. So we do have monitoring plan where we do monitor at given frequency our discharges to the environment, whether it's air or whether it's liquid. So we do monitor this as per our monitoring plan. We do have also risk assessments that are being performed every 3 years. We review our environmental risk assessment, which looks at the facility, what we're discharging, and what's the impact, if any, on the environment. We do have what we call derived release limits, which is kind of a calculation as to what the facility can discharge without affecting the environment and public, and it accounts for, you know, people in the area, what they consume, what comes from the ground, the meat they eat that's grown raised locally. So we do have that also, and I can say that, well, this document was just revised this year and can be made available, but all our discharges so far have been within less than 0.01% of what is our allowable limit derived from those the derived release limits that are calculated. And those are all calculated as per the CSA standards. The other thing that we have done when we have applied for a decommissioning license was performed a environmental effects review for the decommissioning, where we captured what kind of methodology we would be using to decommission the site for the first 3 planning envelopes. And we have established what mitigating measures should be put in our plans. Things like dust suppressions and so on that would be captured in those recommendations. So this is kind of high level. And also, as part of CNL's environmental program, for every work package that we are putting together to execute field work, we do have environmental review form that are describing the exact methodology of the work that's being put in place and all of the environmental requirement that could be required to safely do this work and not impact the environment, considering wildlife. It goes into a lot of different details, and we do implement those recommendations in our plans to make sure we don't affect negatively the environmental while performing our work. And if you would like more information, please contact us and we'll be very happy to share with you what we're doing.
Okay, thanks, Julie. I have another question from W. Turner. So it's for Julie. If the ILW, so that's intermediate level waste, is sent to Chalk River, does that site have the facilities to store that waste?
The waste generated by the decommissioning of Douglas Point is included in the CNL waste management program and strategy. So we did provide those volumes at the time that we proposed decommissioning of the facility, and there is areas to store the waste.
Thanks, Julie. And so we only have a few more questions, so I think we'll be wrapping up a little early, which is great because we actually have 2 more webinars on decommissioning if you're interested this morning at 10 a.m. and that's Eastern time. We've got our decommission, our NPD closure project, which is also a reactor decommissioning project webinar. And then at 11, we have a look at all the facilities decommissioning work that's going on at Chalk River Laboratories. So hope you can join those too. Okay, so we'll turn back to the questions and then we'll sign off on Douglas Point for today. So we have one question. The building structure is a significant amount of concrete that I imagine could be contaminated. Is it able to be completely decontaminated? If not, how is this recycled? Or is this portion of waste sent to landfill? So I'm not sure exactly which building structure is being referenced here. I think this is a Joe question. So maybe you can speak to some of the different buildings and what would happen to the concrete from the different buildings if it were to be contaminated. Probably not the admin.
Yeah. So, if we're talking non-nuclear buildings, there's no contamination there. That's going to be recycled. I think this is probably, I'm going to guess, referring to the reactor building, as that's a huge portion of concrete. And as far as how contaminated that is not yet being characterized. So we don't yet know how deep the contamination goes and those kind of details. But invariably, we're going to recycle what we can based on when we have the knowledge, and what we can't, we'll have to go out as active waste. But we'll be going through whatever, we'll be definitely going through significant decontamination phases to minimize that amount of waste.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, George, or thanks, Joe. Okay, and I think we have one more question, and I think we sort of discussed this already about the DGR and the high level waste from this project, which is right now in that spent fuel canister area. So the question is, what happens to the spent fuel if the high level waste DGR site ends up in Ignis? And I think George can take this one.
So from a fuel perspective, we want to try to use a high safety aspect on it and a lot of principle. So we will minimize, our goal is to minimize handling the fuel multiple times. So at this time, the fuel canister and the fuel are not impacting the decommissioning project. When we have a decision, we will make proper assessment and we'll decide which way to go. Do we go directly to the final waste displacement, or do we go through Chalk River for the consolidation and removal? So I will leave that at that point until we have a better understanding where the DGR is going to be located. I hope that answer and the question.
Great, thanks, George. Okay, so that is all our questions that we have. So again, I'm going to thank everybody for coming today. We really appreciate it. Reach out at any time, ermstakeholder@cnl.ca, or the website. There's a feedback form there, and you can get in touch. And we take note that the poll today mentioned that maybe most people want a little bit more frequency for updates on Douglas Point. And I'll plug the survey again and plug our other webinars. You get a full decommissioning day here for the webinars. And with that, I'll close off. So again, thanks everybody. And Graham, if you want to close the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.